I'd like to thank you for being with us this morning and contributing to the Space Walk of Fame Oral History Project. If you could state your name for us, and then if you could start a little bit how we were discussing about Project Vanguard. We'll start off with that.
My name is Robert L Adcock, better known as Bob in most circles. And I became involved in space when I was with the Glen L Company in Baltimore, Maryland in 1955. I joined the Vanguard program there as a ground electrical engineer working for Warren Opitz. And we designed the electrical ground system for the Vanguard, and then in the fall of 1956 we moved to Florida, all of us, the launch crew plus the installations crew, and we came down and installed all of our equipment on Pad 18A for the Vanguard launch. And I became the electrical rep here on the Vanguard program for both the ground and the airborne electrical systems. And of course I had a lot of help out of Baltimore too.
Were you present during the Vanguard launch in December of 58?
Yeah, I was present for all the launches. I was there. Was that the one that blew up?
Yes. I was wondering if you could just elaborate a little bit about the feelings. I mean, because Sputnik had gone up just prior to that, and all of a sudden, you know, here we have one of our earliest attempts, and well, it didn't quite turn out as how we had anticipated.
I think everybody on the crew felt the pressure of that launch, and it wasn't decided originally. The plan for that launch, that was TV3. That was test vehicle 3, and we at that time, at the original planning, there was not a live satellite to be launched. However, Sputnik did go up, and that put everybody in the United States under pressure. And it wasn't long until somebody in Washington, probably the president, announced that we would be launching a satellite. And the work was frantic to get ready to launch. However, the vehicle had not been totally perfected at that point in time, but modifications were made to accommodate the satellite, and we went ahead with those preparations. From a launch vehicle point of view, it didn't much matter whether we had a satellite or whether it was a pound of lead up there or not. However, the pressure on the entire crew was quite evident. Sometime before launch in, I'll say, January, I think it was, of that year, Von Braun came over from his pad, which was just down the road on the Jupiter, and asked for a tour of the missile. And some of our people gave him a tour, and when he got all done and looked at the schematics and everything, and he said, well, that's quite sophisticated. So then, of course, the fatal day came, and we counted down and attempted to launch, and the stage 1 engine had a problem, and it kind of fell back in the flame bucket. And I was in the blockhouse that day, and we had all kinds of visitors in the blockhouse. And we all, at the instant it went down the flame duct, we all were worried about fire getting back into the blockhouse, and were worried about further explosions. There weren't any. At some time after the burning, I'll say plus 30 minutes, or maybe not even that long, they sent out our safety man and a range safety man and some firemen from the range to look over the wreckage there on the pad. And their idea was if there were any vessels that had trapped gases in them that might tend to explode, they would vent those vessels. And the way they vented them was with a 30-06 rifle. So they began to shoot various things. They shot the helium tank, and they never could get a hole in the helium tank. On the stage one, it was a big sphere and well built to withstand 4,000 psi. So it was strong, and they went on and shot other tanks that vented, and when they got to the satellite, they didn't know what it was, so they shot it too. It was a grapefruit type satellite that was laying there on the ground beeping, so they shot it. And it continued to beep. So we were really discouraged about that. Everybody adjourned to Cocoa Beach and began to drink. The next day was kind of bad because I had to come in not feeling very well and start cleaning up all the wreckage out on the pad. I'm sure, I don't recall, but this was a propulsion problem. So being electrical, I was more involved in assessing the damage that we had to the ground electrical system. And it didn't appear that electrical problem had been the fault of this. So
you were in the clear.
Yeah.
Now, after Vanguard, did you stay down here for a while?
No. Immediately following the Vanguard program, I went to Vandenberg Air Force Base, where the Titan I was being put in as an intercontinental ballistic missile. And we had a lot of work at Vandenberg, and part of that was developing the ground system for the basing system for the Titan I. And I participated in there. I stayed there 2 years. Went out there in '59 and left there in '61, and went to Denver and went to Baltimore and went to work on the Gemini program.
Could you describe a little bit of your work on the early portions of the Gemini project while you were in Baltimore?
Yes. The only way I wound up in Baltimore was I couldn't stand it at Vandenberg, so I wrote to my ex-boss from Florida here, who was then in Baltimore, and asked him for a job. And so he used to be the director in Florida here on the Vanguard program, and he was the director in charge of tests and operations there in Baltimore. And he brought me back to Baltimore and started work, and we were actually working on a program called Dyna-Soar, which was an Air Force program. It was a flying type of an airplane, manned version, but it had money problems like so many other things did, and we were working, and one day we got word that Dyna-Soar is canceled. Turn in all your work, I mean all your work, all your written pads and everything that you'd written anything on or published or anything. So we packaged up all that material and turned it in, and so what are we going to work on now? And the next day they handed out time cards and said, this is the Gemini program. What's a Gemini? Yeah. So that's how it started. When the Gemini program got better defined and what the Baltimore role would be, I was appointed to be the leader in charge of the vertical test facility there, in which after the launch vehicle was manufactured there in Baltimore, it would actually be brought over to the vertical test facility where it would be assembled and erected, and we would actually run through checks there that simulated what would go on here in Florida in the checkouts. And based upon those checks and everything, actually sell the vehicle, get a DD-250 from the Air Force at that point in time for the vehicle.
And a DD-250 is?
That's a piece of paper that the Air Force gives you saying that you've completed the work and you can now collect the money for that portion of the work. So I stayed there, and we actually set that place up. There was an activation. We actually erected a test cell that's very, very much like the erector here in Florida. It had about the same work platform levels on it that the erector here in Florida had, and allow us to actually get up on the vehicle and work it. And then we had the electrical system pretty well complete there, so that we could get we could go into countdowns, and we could actually check out the subsystems and run countdowns there in Baltimore and check this out. So we activated that test cell, and then we also ran the first vehicle checkout and sold it off. Subsequent to that, all the launch vehicles that were produced in Baltimore for the Gemini program were run through that cell and bought off there. Following the first sell-off, I proceeded on down here to Florida for the first launch, and I was here for all 12 launches.
And your first arrival here?
Would have been October 1963.
63?
Mm-hmm.
Since you had been here earlier in 57
Mm-hmm.
and 58,
Mm-hmm.
Could you describe just for briefly the differences that you found out at the Cape between when you were there in the late 50s and when you arrived again in 63?
Yes, there was a significant difference, both on the Cape and in the different towns. There was a great deal of growth in the missile business had been caused by the race that we had to develop ICBMs. You had both Titan and Atlas programs going great guns, as well as the Thor and the Jupiter programs. All ICBMs are RBMs, intermediate range ballistic missiles. And those programs, all in development, attracted a lot of people. And then I think it was 1961, Kennedy said that we should go to the moon, and by 1963, there was a great deal of construction going on in the KSC side. See, up until about 1962 or thereabouts, the Kennedy Space Center did not exist. It was just a woods. Mm-hmm. And when I first got down here, it was remarkable to me how much work was actually going on. You know, we passed, you could still drive down State Road 3 from Titusville here. And I drove down State Road 3 and you used to see all these tractors and trucks and plowing around the ground and everything. And that was totally different. And then you could see changes in population and so forth. And about at that time, the NASA people still had not occupied those quarters. They were just building those quarters at that time. And but there was a great deal of NASA people taking up Air Force real estate over on the Air Force side of the river. And so that was quite noticeable.
From a contractor perspective, how did you see the relationship between the Air Force and NASA? Being, you know, a third party.
The Air Force was most anxious to participate in this program, although it certainly didn't seem to be in the Air Force charter to do that. But somebody who's a lot bigger than me made that decision, you know, and the people that were here assigned to that program were very, very eager and very they had about twice as many people assigned to the Gemini program from the Air Force as they would have on a same value program of, say, a Titan 1 or a Titan 2 or something like that.
Were they there in conjunction with the Manned Orbiting Laboratory?
Well, yes, that was the advertisement. You know, we're going to do this on our own and on Mole. And we got to learn here and, you know, carry that experience. So, and that was certainly good thinking, you know. Now, we didn't see much of the NASA people, at least on the launch vehicle. NASA, you see, was building up for Apollo at that same time, and they were quite okay with letting the Air Force have the launch vehicle role and kind of standing off, but they certainly were involved in the spacecraft preparation and launch. And that's where I first knew Charlie Mars he was involved in the Gemini spacecraft launches.
And And the relationship between Glen L. Martin and NASA then was not a rough one?
It was okay, but we didn't have a contractual relationship.
Okay. All right, now, let's talk a little bit about when you first came here in '63, what you did.
Well, when I first came here, I had all this vertical test experience back in Baltimore, which was invaluable in what they needed here. I was one of 4 test conductors that we had, and then we had a couple of assistant test conductors. But where I brought the most value, I think, was in the scheduling of the work to be done and the knowledge of how the systems interplayed with one another. And for example, I developed the first launch countdown. Now, I don't mean to say that I didn't, copy from the Titan II countdown, so it was okay, but essentially, even they call this Gemini a Titan II. It really was a very, very different Titan II in that it had so many redundant systems on it that Titan II did not have.
And the redundant systems were?
Were the guidance system, for example. There were 2 guidance systems on it. There were 2 controls, 2 hydraulic systems on the stage 1. So you had that kind of redundancy. There was, parallel sets of cables, the wires that carried the signals back and forth were parallel.
And the reason being because this was a
manned space flight, right? And the astronauts had the capability of switching from one guidance system to another in the event of a problem during flight. We never had switchover occur during flight. And that's a testament to the people that worked on all that, and built it. But the capability was there.
Did you have much interaction, with the astronauts, or in your role you didn't see them frequently?
We didn't see that. We'd see them come out, but they were coming out to participate in tests and everything. And sometimes they would come out for motivational things, like to call the whole crew together. But on every launch, before launch, 2 or 3 days before launch, we would go in a closed door session with only 2 or 3 or 4 people in there. The 2 astronauts, 2 test conductors from Martin, and maybe a NASA guy and maybe an Air Force guy. We sat and we discussed the launch countdown and what would happen in the event it didn't, it didn't lift off and continue to be powered flight. So on a one-to-one basis, you got to know I'm pretty good at that point in time. And the 10 seconds after liftoff, still the responsibility for either a go or an abort rested with the Cape here. And in fact, it rested with my boss, who was the chief test conductor for the Martin Company.
And that was?
Frank Carey, Francis X. Carey. And Frank probably had more knowledge than anybody else about the status of the launch vehicle in the early portions of the flight. Usually this was in the form of negative knowledge. You knew you didn't have anything that told you that anything was wrong. So the handovers were always given to Houston at plus 10 seconds, and there weren't any problems that we detected when it left the ground.
What were some of the biggest challenges that you faced leading up to the first manned launch of the Titan II here in Florida?
I would say it was a challenge of procedures, and what I mean by that is we had several procedures that I'm not just talking test procedures. I'm talking about operating procedures, procedures of how you handle critical parts. Several of the parts on the vehicle were designated critical parts. and the reason they were critical parts was because the failure of any one of those could cause an in-flight failure. Martin had never handled critical parts in Florida. We didn't know how to do it. And even though we had procedures, there wasn't general knowledge through right at first, you know, on how you're supposed to do that. There was a learning involved in that. And getting people to adhere to the new procedures was pretty much of a challenge. And also, everybody on that program was certified as to his position in the launch crew. And that took a great deal of training, classroom type, and on-the-job training, and real-time simulations. One of the things that we used to do is for the test conductor who was not going to be launching the next vehicle, we would take the test conductor who was responsible and the crew who was responsible for the next launch, and the guy that wasn't going to be involved in the launch, he would go off and invent scenarios. And we would actually get in the countdown and run through simulations there. We would actually have the power on, have the systems working and everything, and go through a mock countdown. And then he would cause some sort of a malfunction, and he would then see how long it took us to detect this and what we did to get out of it, you know, and protect the astronauts. And so that was something that I'd never been through before, and that was kind of interesting.
As we get closer now to 1965, in March of '65, when we're going to have the first launch with Gus Grissom and John Young, what was the atmosphere amongst the Martin people?
I think it's pretty much optimism. We did a lot of talking in the test conductor's office about that and what we would do, and we were continually. It seems like the thing that sticks in my mind is trying to get the right configuration to launch, because there seemed to always be some modification to an autopilot or a guidance system that needed to be done, or to a propulsion system. And we made those modifications, but we were continually trying to get to that configuration which was authorized for launch. And we could get that pretty quick, but getting the parts and the engineering and everything necessary to make the mods and get them done. But we had all the mods done, and we had good checkouts. We didn't have any unexplained anomalies, and we had lots of reviews and everything. So it was with a great deal of confidence that we went into that launch. And I was in as much as it had been a while since I had launched anything, I was on that first man launch. I was a pad control, which meant assistant test conductor's role, and that was out on the launch pad. So all the work on the launch pad for Martin and the launch vehicle was under my control. And you're the eyes and the ears for the test conductor when he's in the blockhouse. You know. And so I went through that on that particular launch.
Did you have any problems up to the launch itself?
I don't recall any, no.
What were your emotions when you saw it go up?
Thankful. Thankful that it lifted off. Yeah, you always got that nagging doubt in your mind. Will this thing, will it do as it's advertised? And it did. Yeah, it really did. It made me very proud. You know.
Among all the other Gemini launches, are there any unusual things that happened that you would like to discuss in relation to the launch vehicle?
in well, Gemini 4 was my first launch, and that was certainly well, wasn't new, it was new to me, but it wasn't unfamiliar. I knew exactly what was going on. I'd written the launch countdown, and that was the job of the test conductor for whoever was going to be the test conductor at the time, was to actually write the launch countdowns so he would know what's in there. And I had written the launch countdown, and so I knew what was going on, and we had a good count. And when we got down to, I think it was T-minus 30 minutes, you were supposed to, at that time the pad was cleared of everybody, and you're supposed to no, it wasn't clear, but you were supposed to let the erector down at that point in time. And when we started to do that, the erector got part of the way down and wouldn't come the rest of the way down. So we tried a couple of times and still couldn't get it down, and we held the count. And my boss, Frank Harry, who was sitting there, grabbed the lead mechanical engineer and said, "We're going to the pad." And you know, I'm left there. Well, that's okay. I'm in charge anyway. But they're out there on the pad, and Chris Kraft called from down in Houston, and he said, "Bob, what's going on down there?" Well, at that point in time, I was kind of blind because these guys were going out to the pad, and I didn't know what they were going to do. But so I had a tape for a long time of me trying to kind of smooth talk Chris Kraft over the net about that. I think he guessed that I didn't know what was going on, but he never told me. But he did not. But anyway, they went out to the pad, and they couldn't get this one electrical contactor that was necessary to lower the erector to actually hold in. So they grabbed a sledgehammer handle, and with the sledgehammer handle, because it was made out of wood, they were isolated from the 480 volts, so they actually held the thing in with the sledgehammer handle, and the erector came on down. That was just a temporary fix to get on with the count. So we picked up the count and went ahead and launched. I did make the remark to Frank later, right after the launch, "Boy, that thing was a long time getting off the pad." And he says, "They all are when you're responsible for them." But anyway, that incident with the erector cost some people their jobs. Yeah, and what had happened was, I think 2 nights before the launch, some of our mechanical people had worked a preventative maintenance card on that equipment, and that wasn't under configuration control or something. Anyway, they changed the configuration of the electrical and then didn't test it, see. And the next test was on the day of the launch, and it didn't work. And so, in fact, that was so bad that the director of the program here, who was Joseph Verlander, put the erector under the erector configuration and operation under the control of the director of quality control at the Canaveral division here. He was not even the director of quality control on the program. He was the overall director of quality control. We had more than one program here. Thus, of course, he didn't really know very much about the erector and its operation, but we had a man that did know something about that, and his name was Fagan. And the director of quality control's name was Hagen. So we had the Hagen and Fagan team would decide when and if the erector was going to be operated or maintained or whatever. So you had to convene the Hagen and Fagan team when you wanted something done. And this went on to the end of the program.
I'm going to pause here just for one moment.
Sure.
I need to switch over this audio tape.
Okay.
Okay. When we left off, we had been at Gemini 4. Could we move a little bit forward into Gemini 6 and 7, which would be the first rendezvous, manned rendezvous? Could you describe some of the problems that occurred with particularly Stafford and Shiraz flight?
Okay. The 76 mission was something that was dreamt up when the target vehicle, which was launched on an Atlas Agena, when it malfunctioned for that particular flight. I believe that we scrubbed the Vehicle 6 launch at that time, and then decided, NASA decided to come up with the 76 mission, in which we would put 2 spacecraft in orbit, one 10 days later than the first, and they would rendezvous, and that would be a good mission. And we had, that became the 76 mission, because Vehicle 6 was ready to go, and in fact we were in launch countdown, but then scrubbed out because of the target vehicle failure. Thus we, and I don't remember, all the things that happened on 6, but we went ahead and launched 6 anyway. But the thing that does stick in my mind is we were then supposed to immediately erect Vehicle 7, or what was that, vice versa? I don't remember which was which, but anyway, we had 2 people in orbit, and they were waiting for another launch within 10 days from the ground with 2 more people. And everything went along just fine, because the vehicle, seems like we launched 7 first. Is that right? Yeah, okay. We launched 7 first, and then 6 had already been checked out and was indeed ready for launch, so we brought it over and erected it. It went through the checkouts. Everything was streamlined. We were right on schedule. Now, it turns out that we had 2 full crews. We could either launch at night or in the daytime. So I had a crew, and I was actually working second shift. And we were working 12-hour days at that time to make the 10-day launch centers. And so the day of the launch for 6 came along, and they counted down, and actually I think they lighted, yes, I know they lighted the engine, it shut down. Okay, so obviously there was a big need for the second shift to get there that night to relieve the launch crew. They had been there for 12 hours, and so I was in Cocoa Beach at my home at the time, and then this was one of the early ones that you could watch on TV, and look and then run out the front door to watch it fly, and nothing ever happened. So I came back and looked at the TV, and it was still sitting there, so I knew I had to go on and get to work. And I got out to work, and of course we had to safe the vehicle and get the ordnance out and offload the propellants, because the problem was in the electrical system down. And as I recall, a tail plug had fallen out, and that's what caused the vehicle to shut down. But anyway, with all the propellants in there.
What's a tail plug?
Yeah.
What is it?
Well, the tail plug is a device that actually started a program. Once the vehicle left the ground, the tail plug would pull out and start a programmer, onboard programmer clock. And But anyway, we had to offload the propellants and get the ordnance out and make the vehicle safe, and that's about what we did in the first 12 hours. And then we went on home. We were bushed at that point in time, and by then it's Monday morning, and I believe it was Sunday. I'm pretty sure it was Sunday. Monday morning, sometime during the day, Monday, I was riding around in the car going someplace, and I heard over the radio that not only was there this electrical problem, but they had found a problem with the stage 1 engine. And if it had not shut down on account of the electric problem, it would have shut down on account of the engine problem had it been just a few milliseconds later. So they went in and found a dust cap in the line that went from the gas generator or the igniter into the gas generator. And that caused all kind of consternations and all kind of meetings between NASA and the Air Force and Martin and anybody else that was interested. And we went on in, and I don't remember that night, but then the next night was, next day was Tuesday, and they had meetings all day long on Tuesday about what to do about these problems and everything. I got there on Tuesday night when I reported into work. My boss, Frank, said that he would like to see me, so I went over to the ready room there, and Frank says, "I don't know how you're going to make it." He says, "All we've done is argued all day long about what needed to be done, and I would like you to try to make it." And I said, "Okay, what needs to be done?" And I looked on, we had a board there in the ready room that showed all the remaining procedures, test procedures that had to be accomplished. And they were all propulsion, and the electrical guys were in good shape, and all these things were propulsion. And of course, we had a propulsion crew there that evening, and most of the men hung out down below in a little room down below the erector there in the base of the launch pad. And that's where they had their tools, and that's where they had their procedures and their work clothes and everything. And so I got in touch with the chief of quality control for the program there that night, and I said, "Okay, I want every inspector that you've got propulsion-wise out on the launch pad. And I'm going to get every technician and engineer that we've got on propulsion, they're going to be out on the launch pad." And so I told these guys out on the launch pad, I said, "I don't want to see you going back down there below. If you need a part, we'll have the part brought to you. If you need some paper, we'll have the paper brought to you." I called one of the other systems, the electrical system. I said, "I want a big pot of coffee made and put right here on the launch pad." And I said, "If you need coffee, come over here and get it. If you need to go to the bathroom, there's nobody looking." And I said, "I don't want to see anything but you guys twisting knobs and wrenches out here, you know, and getting ready." And at one point, I have this mental image of all these guys working, and I had the chief of quality control there with me. If there was a problem, man, we wrote an item and dispositioned it right there and stamped it off, you know. And at midnight, the chow truck came along. We were getting good support from the range in those days, and the chow truck came along and backed up to the launch pad. And I said, "I want to buy every donut and cookie that you've got on here," you know. So I did, and put them out there. And everybody had donuts and coffee all night long, you know. At 7 a.m., they had, NASA was here in force by that time. I believe that Bob Gilruth was here. And Chuck Matthews, who was the NASA man, head of the program, I'm sure he was here for the 7 a.m. test conductors meeting. This is where you found out whether or not we could go, you know, whether or not we were on schedule, you know. So I went over and met with Frank that morning, and at the end of the shift, and I told Frank where to go. And I thought he would kiss me. He was so glad to be back on schedule. We were under the gun, so, you know. And then I hung around for the meeting. I wanted to see how these guys reacted, and they all were very, very glad, you know, that we were on schedule. So we went ahead and launched.
Do you have any other unusual problems that occurred for the remainder of the Geminis that you'd like to discuss? Is there anything that strikes you, an anomaly or anything of that nature?
We had one of the late problems. We had a spurious command from the guidance system that was called SECO, and SECO was Sustainer Engine Cutoff. That's what that stood for. And one of the guidance systems inadvertently issued this command on one of our tests. And the people who were actually running the test was guidance system tests or control system tests. Those were two different groups. Guidance are separate from controls, but they connected together. Couldn't isolate this command, or couldn't make it happen again. But there it was on written record, so we all knew that. Well, that would have been devastating had that happened in flight, so we had to find that problem. And no amount of testing at the subsystem level would seem to reveal what this problem was. So finally, it boiled up to where we had a system level testing was required to isolate the problem, and somebody dubbed the thing as Baby SECO. Can anybody tell us where Baby SECO is? And I don't know why that was funny at the time, but it had something to do with television, I guess, some show on television. And we ran a system level test in which it was almost like a launch countdown, and the fact that you had all the systems powered up on the launch vehicle. We were sitting in the blockhouse like we were actually launching, and sure enough, we made it happen again, and we were able to trace the origin of it to a spurious command out of the guidance system. So we changed that out, and we're able to. But that took a lot of testing to get that done, and that kind of sticks in the back of my mind.
As we're getting to the close of Gemini now.
Okay.
Can you remark for yourself personally the legacy of Project Gemini?
Well, one of the things that happened was we were coming up on one or two of the last launches, and I think we were coming up on vehicle 11, and which was my launch. And the management at Martin were worried that all of our technicians would leave, and our engineers too, because NASA and their contractors were building up in KSC ready for Apollo. And so the Martin company sent a vice president down here, which was unusual in those days. So he came down, he had a Sunday meeting of everybody out on the launch pad that worked for Martin Marietta at the time, and he announced that for all the people who participated in the launch and who would stay would get a bonus of $200 a launch for every launch they had participated in, if you would stay. If you left, of course, you would forfeit anything. And the idea was to keep people on the program until such time as the launches were, because Martin was under our contract to provide a certified team. So that was good. So in answer to your question, the legacy that we left was actually when the last launch was over with, I would say 95% of the launch crew were either hired by Grumman or North American or some of the other contractors there. And they certainly carried with them the experience of manned launch and the procedures of how it should be done and everything. So I don't believe, I believe that's a benefit that nobody even thinks about in these days, and I certainly think it gave the Apollo program a leg up, because suppose all of those contractors and everybody, they brought in people who didn't understand manned launches, and there would have been a longer learning period required to bring them up to speed other than what it was.
Is there any other items that you'd like to reflect upon before we conclude?
Oh, we had some good parties.
Parties that were, but that brings me to one thing.
Okay.
When you did have successful launches and stuff, would you go down to Cocoa Beach?
Yeah.
Okay. And do you have any special memories of totally wild parties or anything?
Yeah,
that you care to share with us?
Yeah, I got a lot of them, but I'd share this one. After the first launch, this was unmanned. This was Launch Vehicle 1, but it had a MacDeck spacecraft on it, albeit just a shell. But the test conductor for that launch was not me. It was a fellow named Charles Cicchetti. And Charles went out, called him Chuck, and he stayed around for 3 or 4 launches, then he left. But he and I decided we would go out and have some drinks, and we were looking for a party. We went down to Cocoa Beach looking for a party. And we found one that was a Martin party, and they were in the Colony 7 motel, which is the astronauts motel. They were in a motel room, and I don't know how we found out that they were in this particular room, but we knocked on the door and they saw who we were, and they said, "Get out of here, you bums. You know, we're not going to give you anything to drink." There wasn't hardly anybody. This was strictly PR, I'm sure. And I looked across the street, and there was, at the Holiday Inn, there was a line of folks over there, and I said, "Look, Chuck, there's a party over there. Let's go over, crash the party." So we went over, and it was a McDonald's party. And we saw some of the guys we knew from the blockhouse, you know, and so we just got in line, and we were all chatting and about great launch and all this kind of stuff. And the line moved on up, and as I went in the door, I was introduced to Mr. McDonald. And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't work for you." And, but he says, "Come on in and get a drink." He says, "Who do you work for?" And I said, "Martin." He says, "I used to too. I used to work for Glen L myself." He says, "But you're welcome to have a drink on me." So that was a great launch. And so that's the one party that I would like to share.
Well, I thank you for contributing this afternoon.
Okay.
And